Pull up a satellite map of the United States. The coasts are lit up, the Midwest is a patchwork of farms, and then, somewhere west of the 100th meridian, it all just stops. Hundreds of miles of almost nothing. According to the 2010 U.S. Census, about 47% of all census blocks in the country contain 0 people. Nearly half of America sits empty. Some of it is desert, some of it is frozen, some of it is off limits because the government tested nuclear bombs there, and some of it is just quietly burning underground. These are 11 empty places no one lives in, and exactly why half of America is empty. Place 11. The Yukon-Koyukuk Census Area, Alaska. If you're looking for the single emptiest administrative unit in the entire United States, you don't have to look very hard. You just have to look very far north. The Yukon-Koyukuk Census Area in Alaska is larger than the state of Montana. It covers approximately 147,000 square miles of subarctic forest, river valleys, tundra, and mountain ranges. As of the 2020 census, its total population was 5,343 people. That works out to roughly 1 person for every 22 square miles. It is the least densely populated county equivalent of all 3,141 county equivalents in the United States, and it isn't particularly close. The census area has no borough seat, no central administrative hub, because it operates as part of Alaska's unorganized borough, which is the state's designation for places that haven't formed a local government. The largest communities are the cities of Galena and Fort Yukon, each with populations well under 2,000 people. There are dozens of smaller settlements and villages scattered across the region, most reachable only by small aircraft. Getting between communities in Yukon-Koyukuk typically means a bush plain. Roads connecting towns are essentially non-existent throughout much of the area. The gates of the Arctic National Park and Preserve sits within the census area. It is one of the least visited national parks in the country, receiving fewer than 10,000 visitors per year, in part because there is no road into it. You fly in, or you hike in from the Dalton Highway, and either way you need to plan for the fact that help is not close and weather doesn't negotiate. The economy of the region is driven primarily by subsistence, hunting, fishing, trapping, supplemented by state and federal government employment and some small-scale commercial fishing. The people who live here have made choices about the kind of life they want that most Americans consider in the abstract and then immediately discard. The cold, the isolation, the complete absence of road infrastructure, and the logistical cost of living in an area where almost nothing arrives by truck are the reasons the population keeps declining. The 2020 census count was lower than the 2010 count. The 2025 estimate is lower still, trending downward at roughly 1 to 2% per year. Place 10. The Nevada National Security Site, Nye County, Nevada. About 65 miles northwest of Las Vegas, surrounded on 3 sides by the Nellis Air Force Range, sits 1,360 square miles of restricted desert that the federal government used to test nuclear weapons for 41 years. Between January 1951 and September 1992, the United States detonated 928 nuclear devices at what was then called the Nevada Test Site. 100 of those tests were atmospheric, meaning mushroom clouds visible from the Las Vegas Strip on clear days. The remaining 828 were underground, which is why the landscape of Yucca Flat is pockmarked with hundreds of subsidence craters, collapsed ground, above where the detonation chambers caved in after the explosions. The Sedan crater, created in 1962 by a 104-kiloton thermonuclear device as part of an experiment in peaceful nuclear excavation, is 1,280 feet wide and 320 feet deep. It is the largest human-made crater in the United States, and you can stand at its rim on a public tour and look at it. The site was chosen because the surrounding land appeared empty. The prevailing winds blew east over sparsely populated desert regions of Utah and Arizona. What the government's calculations underestimated, or chose not to prioritize, was the effect on those communities. Downwinders in St. George, Utah, 135 miles east of the site, experienced disproportionately high rates of thyroid cancer, leukemia, and lymphoma from fallout that began hitting the city as early as 1953. Congress passed the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act in 1990 to provide payments to affected downwinders, though many families who sought compensation found the documentation requirements difficult to meet. The site is now called the Nevada National Security Site and remains active. Subcritical nuclear experiments continue. Low-level radioactive waste is disposed of there. Monthly public tours are available, though they're notoriously hard to get onto, booking out months in advance. Large portions of the land are expected to remain contaminated by isotopes like plutonium-239 for roughly the next 24,000 years. The site wasn't empty, it was emptied. The Dark Atlas, describing how the federal government displaced Western Shoshone people from ancestral land to create the test site, nobody lives there, and for the foreseeable future, nobody will. Place 9, Centralia, Pennsylvania. Centralia used to be a real town. In the early 20th century, it had nearly 3,000 residents, 7 churches, a theater, multiple hotels, and more than 24 saloons. Anthracite coal mining was the local economy, and for a long time it worked. By 1960, most of the mines had shut down, but around 1,100 people still called Centralia home. Then, in May 1962, the town council decided to clean up a local landfill, an abandoned strip mine pit, by burning the trash before a Memorial Day event. The fire wasn't fully extinguished. Smoldering embers spread into the network of abandoned coal mine tunnels beneath the town, found a coal seam, and kept going. For years, the fire burned underground with minimal visible signs. Then, gradually, the symptoms appeared. Residents reporting carbon monoxide in their basements, trees dying above mine tunnels, the ground turning hot and cracked. On Valentine's Day 1981, a 12-year-old boy named Todd Domboski was walking in his backyard when the ground opened beneath him. He fell into a sinkhole 150 feet deep, filled with steam and carbon monoxide. He grabbed a tree root and held on until his cousin pulled him out. That moment effectively ended the argument about what to do with Centralia. The state of Pennsylvania condemned the town, bought out the residents, demolished the buildings, and in 1992, the federal government revoked Centralia's zip code. The fire is still burning today. The Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection estimates it could continue burning for another 100 years or more. A handful of longtime residents refused relocation and still live there under a life estate agreement. They can stay as long as they live, but the property reverts to the state at death. There are currently estimated to be fewer than 10 residents remaining. The graffitied stretch of abandoned Route 61, known as Graffiti Highway, became a popular destination for urban explorers for decades before being buried under tons of fill dirt in 2020. Place 8. The Great Basin Interior, Nevada and Utah. The Great Basin covers approximately 200,000 square miles across most of Nevada, the western half of Utah, and portions of California, Idaho, Oregon, and Wyoming. It is, by a significant margin, the largest desert in the United States and one of the emptiest populated territories in the country. What makes the Great Basin unusual is its hydrology. Every river, stream, and rain event that falls within its boundaries stays within its boundaries. There is no outlet to the ocean. Water drains into terminal lakes or evaporates or sinks underground. This is a closed system, and what remains of its ancient lakes, the Great Salt Lake, Pyramid Lake, Walker Lake, are the shrunken remnants of vast bodies of water that dried when the glaciers retreated roughly 10,000 years ago. The desert exists because the Sierra Nevada catches essentially all the moisture coming in from the Pacific. By the time that air crosses the mountains and descends on the other side, it's dry. Average annual rainfall across much of the Central Basin is under 10 inches, in some areas much less. The result is hundreds of miles of valley floors covered in sagebrush, salt flats, and alkali playas between parallel mountain ranges. The section of U.S. Highway 50 crossing Nevada, nicknamed the loneliest road in America, by Life magazine in 1986, runs for 287 miles between Ely and Fallon with virtually no services. The Great Basin National Heritage Area, which spans 16,000 square miles near the Nevada-Utah border, is home to only about 23,000 people. Bristlecone pines grow on the higher ridges of the Great Basin. Some of them are nearly 5,000 years old, which means they were alive when the Egyptians were building the pyramids. They survive because the conditions that make this landscape hostile to almost everything else, extreme temperature swings, dry air, thin soil, are exactly the conditions they're adapted to. Place 7. The Owyhee Plateau, Idaho, Oregon, and Nevada. The Owyhee Plateau is a region of high desert canyon country in the southwestern corner of Idaho, stretching into adjacent parts of Oregon and Nevada. It doesn't have the name recognition of places like Death Valley or the Grand Canyon, but in terms of raw emptiness and inaccessibility, it competes with anything on this list. Owyhee County in Idaho covers about 7,700 square miles, larger than Connecticut and Rhode Island combined. Its population is approximately 12,000 people, giving it a density of around 1.6 people per square mile. But that number flatters the emptiness of the interior because most of those residents live near the Snake River and the county's few towns. The canyon country in the middle of the plateau, cut by the Owyhee, Bruneau, and Jarbidge rivers, is essentially uninhabited and largely unreachable. The Owyhee River Canyon in places reaches depths of 1,000 feet through ancient basalt lava flows and rhyolite formations millions of years old. There are no maintained roads into much of the canyon system. Getting to the river requires multi-day raft trips launched from remote put-ins, and the logistics of resupply and extraction are complicated enough that organized trips need substantial planning and experience with desert wilderness conditions. The river runs through Class 4 whitewater in several sections, and rescue is not available. The Bureau of Land Management administers most of the plateau. In 2009, Congress designated over 500,000 acres in southwestern Idaho as the Owyhee Canyonlands Wilderness. The wild horse population in parts of the plateau sometimes exceeds the human population of adjacent rangelands. Pronghorn antelope and bighorn sheep move through the canyons largely without encountering people, which is perhaps the simplest possible description of how remote this landscape actually is. Place 6. The American Prairie, Eastern Montana. Eastern Montana is a place that looks on a map like it should have more going on than it does. It's flat, it's accessible by road, and the climate, while harsh, isn't Alaska. And yet, vast stretches of eastern Montana's high plains are essentially empty, defined by the remnants of the shortgrass prairie ecosystem that once covered a huge swath of the central continent before agriculture, the cattle industry, and the near extermination of the American bison transformed it. The High Line, as the stretch of Highway 2 and the old Great Northern Railway route across northern Montana is known, passes through counties with populations sometimes measured in the hundreds. Garfield County, in the center of eastern Montana, has about 1,200 people spread across 4,600 square miles, roughly one person per 4 square miles. Valley County is slightly denser. Petroleum County, tucked into the north-central part of the state, had fewer than 500 people in the 2020 census across 1,650 square miles, making it the least populated county in the continental United States. The economy is almost entirely ranching and dryland wheat farming, with some oil extraction in the north. There are few towns. The towns that exist have been shrinking since the 1920s and 1930s as consolidation in agriculture reduced the need for the dense network of small service towns the railroads created. Much of the land is currently in transition. A private conservation initiative called American Prairie is working to assemble a continuous block of native prairie habitat that could eventually reach 3 million acres. The project is deeply controversial locally, partly because it involves the removal of cattle fencing to allow bison to roam across properties that ranching families have managed for generations. Whatever one thinks of the project's merits, the land underneath the argument is genuinely vast and genuinely empty. You can drive for 2 hours without seeing another car. People don't understand that until they actually do it. A Garfield County rancher, speaking to the Montana Free Press in 2022, Place 5, the Sonoran and Chihuahuan Desert Borderlands, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas. The stretch of land along and near the U.S.-Mexico border in southern Arizona, New Mexico, and the Big Bend region of Texas is among the most logistically challenging terrain in the country. It is also among the least populated, for reasons that are partly climatic and partly simply a function of distance from everything. Brewster County in Texas, which contains Big Bend National Park, covers roughly 6,200 square miles, larger than Connecticut. Its population is around 9,000 people, most of them concentrated in the small city of Alpine. The park itself, a landscape of desert mountain ranges, the Rio Grande Canyon, hot springs, and vast stretches of desert scrub that stretch to the horizon, sees about 500,000 visitors per year, but has essentially no permanent residential population inside its boundaries. The nearest urban center of any significance is several hours away in any direction. The Sonoran Desert in southern Arizona extends through large sections of multiple counties, but the areas away from the Phoenix Metro and Tucson corridor are sparsely populated desert scrub interrupted by saguaro cactus forests and organ pipe formations. Summer temperatures regularly exceed 110 degrees Fahrenheit. The danger of the desert crossing for people moving north without authorization has been extensively documented. The remains of hundreds of individuals who died attempting to walk through it have been found by the humanitarian organization Humane Borders, which maintains a public map of recorded deaths going back to the 1990s. The Chihuahuan Desert in New Mexico and Texas adds another large block of emptiness. The Jornada del Muerto Basin, whose name translates roughly as Journey of the Dead Man, was named by early Spanish travelers who nearly died crossing its 90-mile waterless stretch. It later became the site of the Trinity test on July 16, 1945, the world's first nuclear detonation. The American Southwest has a long tradition of being used as space where difficult things happen. Place 4. The Upper Peninsula of Michigan, Northern Great Lakes. Not all empty places in America are deserts or tundra. The Upper Peninsula of Michigan, separated from the rest of the state by the Straits of Mackinac and connected by the Mackinac Bridge, is a heavily forested, sparsely populated landmass of about 16,000 square miles, sitting between Lake Superior to the north and Lakes Michigan and Huron to the south. The Upper Peninsula has a total population of around 300,000 people, most of whom live in a handful of cities along the southern shoreline. The interior, particularly the western end of the UP around the Gogebic and Ontonagon counties, is among the most isolated territory in the eastern United States. The Porcupine Mountains Wilderness State Park in the western UP is the largest state park in Michigan and one of the largest tracts of old-growth forest remaining east of the Mississippi River. The winters are the main reason more people don't live there. The western UP regularly receives over 200 inches of snow per year, fed by lake-effect snowfall off Lake Superior. The town of Ironwood, Michigan, averages about 170 inches annually. Several communities in the region have lost significant population since the copper and iron mining booms of the late 19th and early 20th centuries collapsed, leaving behind stone and brick downtowns built for a much larger population that is no longer there. Place 3. The Outer Banks of the Great Plains, Western Kansas and Oklahoma Panhandle. Western Kansas and the Oklahoma Panhandle occupy a position in American geography that should be familiar to anyone who has ever driven I-70 or US 270 across the Central Plains and wondered if the landscape was ever going to change. The horizon stays flat. The towns get smaller. The distances between gas stations get longer. At some point, you stop expecting the next hill and start accepting that there isn't one. Stanton County, Kansas. in the far southwestern corner of the state, has a population of about 2,000 people in an area of roughly 680 square miles. Wallace County, just north of it, has fewer than 1,500 residents and consistently ranks among the 10 or 15 least populated counties in the continental United States. The Oklahoma Panhandle, a narrow strip of 3 counties that follows the northern Texas border, is a region of high plains and dry creek beds with a combined population under 35,000 across more than 5,000 square miles. In some of these counties, the nearest hospital is over an hour away by car. The nearest city with a population over 50,000 is in a different state. These counties were not always so empty. The Dust Bowl of the 1930s, triggered by drought, overplowing, and the systematic destruction of the native shortgrass prairie that had held the topsoil in place, turned large areas of western Kansas, the Oklahoma Panhandle, and adjacent parts of Colorado and Texas into a landscape where the topsoil literally blew away. Black blizzards, walls of airborne soil sometimes reaching 8,000 feet high, buried farmsteads, suffocated livestock, and made entire regions temporarily uninhabitable. Millions of acres of farmland were essentially destroyed. Hundreds of thousands of people left. Many of those who stayed saw their communities shrink to a fraction of their previous size, and many of them never recovered. The population of Baca County, Colorado, just west of the Kansas border, peaked around 1930 and has been declining with occasional brief reversals ever since. The Ogallala Aquifer, which underlies much of this region and has enabled the irrigated agriculture that kept some of these counties viable through the second half of the 20th century, is being depleted at a rate that exceeds natural recharge by a wide margin. The aquifer took roughly 6 million years to fill. In some areas of western Kansas, water levels have dropped more than 150 feet since large-scale irrigation began in the 1950s. Several counties have already seen significant reductions in irrigated acreage as the water table drops, and agricultural economists project that parts of the region will return to dryland farming, or abandon farming altogether, within decades. The story of emptiness in this region is not finished. In some ways, it's just entering its next chapter. Place 2, the San Luis Valley, southern Colorado. The San Luis Valley sits at around 7,500 feet elevation in south-central Colorado, ringed by 2 of the most dramatic mountain ranges in the Rockies. The Sangre de Cristo Mountains rise to the east, their highest peaks pushing past 14,000 feet, and the San Juan Mountains anchor the western horizon. From the valley floor, you can see the full arc of both ranges simultaneously on a clear day, which happens often because the air here is dry enough that weather systems passing over the mountains drop almost everything they're carrying before they reach you. The valley receives about 7 inches of precipitation annually. For comparison, Phoenix gets 8. The valley is approximately 125 miles long and 65 miles wide, covering roughly 7,500 square miles at altitude. Its population sits under 50,000 people, some of the lowest density for any comparable valley in the country. The isolation is geographical and economic simultaneously. The mountain ranges that frame the valley create a visual spectacle and a logistical barrier. Every supply chain, every commute to a larger city, every trip to a regional hospital involves crossing a mountain pass. In winter, those passes close. When they close, the valley becomes substantially more self-contained than most Americans ever experience. At the eastern edge of the valley, where the Sangre de Cristos meet the flat valley floor, the Great Sand Dunes National Park and Preserve occupies a stretch of terrain that genuinely stops people mid-sentence when they see it for the first time. Wind-driven sand from the valley floor has accumulated over thousands of years into dunes reaching 750 feet in height, the tallest in North America, sitting improbably at the base of a 14,000-foot mountain range with a creek running in front of them. Medano Creek, which flows seasonally along the dune base, produces a phenomenon called surge flow. pulses of water moving in waves across the sand that exists in only a handful of places on Earth. It is one of the stranger landscapes in the country, and it sits in a valley most Americans couldn't locate on a map. Below the valley floor, the confined San Luis Valley aquifer system sustains the region's potato farming and other agriculture, despite the arid surface climate. The valley produces a significant share of Colorado's potato crop, along with barley, quinoa, and other cold-hardy crops that can tolerate the short growing season and the frost that can arrive in any month. What the aquifer has historically provided, the valley has used. Whether that balance holds as demand and climate pressures increase is a question the region is beginning to ask seriously. Extreme cold, limited economic development, and the logistical reality of living enclosed between major mountain ranges on multiple sides keep the population low, and the valley largely unknown to the people who would probably find it remarkable if they ever made the drive. Place 1. The Atchafalaya Basin, south-central Louisiana. The Atchafalaya Basin is the largest river swamp in the United States, and one of the last places in the country where the land itself genuinely hasn't been negotiated into submission. It covers approximately 1.4 million acres, about 2,200 square miles, of bottomland hardwood forest, cypress tupelo swamp, lakes, and bayous in south-central Louisiana, running between Baton Rouge and the Gulf Coast in a corridor roughly 15 miles wide and 140 miles long. To fly over it is to understand immediately why most of it has never been settled. From above, it looks less like land with water in it and more like water with occasional land in it. The Atchafalaya carries about 30% of the combined flow of the Mississippi and Red Rivers south to the Gulf. The basin is fed by this flow and shaped entirely by it, creating a water table so consistently high and flood cycles so regular that permanent settlement across most of the interior has never been practical at any point in human history. The few communities that exist, Henderson, Butte-La Rose, and a handful of others, sit on natural levees or elevated structures at the edges of the wetland, not in the middle of it. The interior of the basin is accessible only by boat. Parts of it have seen no ground-level human survey in decades. Maps of the interior are, in places, educated approximations. The wildlife density in the Atchafalaya is extraordinary, even by Louisiana standards. The basin holds one of the highest concentrations of American alligators in any comparable habitat in North America, alongside cottonmouth water moccasins, black bears, river otters, and one of the largest colonies of great blue herons in the country. During spring migration, hundreds of species of songbirds funnel through the basin corridor, and the cypress tupelo swamps provide nesting habitat for wood ducks, prothonotary warblers, and species that have lost most of their bottomland forest habitat elsewhere in the southeast. The combination of water, dense vegetation, and flood cycles that makes the basin impractical for human habitation has made it, almost by accident, one of the most significant wildlife refuges in the eastern United States. The Army Corps of Engineers has managed the Atchafalaya through a complex system of flood control structures since the 1960s, primarily to prevent something that sounds straightforward, but carries enormous consequences. The Mississippi River wants to change course. The Atchafalaya offers the Mississippi a shorter, steeper path to the Gulf, and without active intervention, the river would naturally shift into that channel. A process called avulsion that has happened multiple times over the past several thousand years as the delta has evolved. The old river control structure in Avoyelles Parish is the specific piece of infrastructure holding that arrangement in place, managing the flow split between the two channels and preventing the kind of rapid shift that would leave New Orleans and Baton Rouge stranded on a diminished river, collapse the port infrastructure that handles a significant share of American agricultural exports, and permanently reshape the hydrology of southern Louisiana. It is, in the view of some engineers, one of the most consequential single pieces of infrastructure in the country, holding in place an arrangement that nature is continuously working to undo. People don't live in the interior of the Atchafalaya Basin for the same reason no one has ever lived there. The water decides. Not the Army Corps of Engineers, not developers, not anyone else. The basin doesn't accommodate, it absorbs. Everything that enters it on the water's terms eventually becomes part of the swamp, and the swamp has been doing this long enough that it no longer notices. Nearly half of the United States is empty, and the reasons vary dramatically from place to place. Some of it is desert that won't support large populations without importing water from somewhere else. Some of it is cold enough that the infrastructure costs of living there are simply prohibitive. Some of it is owned and controlled by the federal government for purposes that preclude residential use. And some of it, like Centralia, used to have people and no longer does. What all of these places have in common is that the emptiness isn't random. Each one has a specific, concrete reason why the humans looked at it and said, "Not here." Sometimes that reason is geography. Sometimes it's climate. Sometimes it's something a government did with a 104 kiloton thermonuclear device. If you found this useful, hit the like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people. And if you want more content on the geography and history that shapes the country, subscribe. New videos go up regularly.